Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending this Octopus 101 webinar. Today we're going to be talking about deploying your first Java application with Octopus Deploy. My name is Mark Harrison and I'm a continuous delivery architect here at Octopus. I'll be moderating the webinar today. Our presenter for us is Adam Close.
So what are we going to do today? So we're going to be deploying a Java application to Tomcat, which is running it on Ubuntu Linux. We're going to do it using Octopus to do that. We're going to be covering a lot of topics in Octopus, not going to be going really in detail, but we're going to go from a fresh instance of Octopus to deploying our Java application to development, test, and production. So the kind of things we're going to cover, we're going to cover setting up infrastructure in Octopus, so environment and deployment targets. We're also going to tell Octopus about our packages. So they're going to be what software we're deploying. We're going to set up a project and some variables in Octopus and the deployment process. We're going to tie it all together at the end, create a release, deploy that out to our application out to the infrastructure. And at the end, I'm going to touch on Runbooks and show how they can help with your application in Octopus. And then, like Mark said, we'll get a Q&A going at the end, and hopefully I can answer your questions. So what will we be actually deploying? So we'll be deploying a Spring Java web application, a sample application called Pet Clinic. There are two packages, so there's two elements of this application that we need to deploy. We need to deploy the web front end, and we also need to deploy a database migrations package that's provided to us from Redgate. It's called Flyweight. In terms of infrastructure, we're going to have Tomcat application servers running in dev, test, and production. They're going to be connecting to a AWS RDS MySQL database. So that's obviously there's two packages. A zip package for the Flyweight database package and a WAR web package for our Java application. I built these earlier using Jenkins and Maven. So for anyone who's not heard of Octopus or what it does, so this is the kind of common CI/CD pipeline that we normally see. We have a developer here, checks in some code into source control, have a CI build server, monitor that source control, pick it up, build it, run some unit tests, create artifacts or application packages, and then from there, get those packages to development, QA, and prod. So Octopus fits in right after the build server. Octopus doesn't replace the build server. Build server can push the packages into Octopus. Octopus will take over and then deploy to your environment. In this case, on this slide, we've got dev, QA, and production. So I'll jump out. I'm going to jump into Octopus. Before I do that, actually, what I'll do, if I just jump into AWS, so the infrastructure today that I'm deploying to is all running in AWS. So I've got 4 EC2 instances. I've got a dev box for my web application, a test, and a production box. I've also got a database box, and this is where I'm actually going to run my database migration scripts from. They're all running Ubuntu Linux. So I'll jump into the dashboard again. So if you're new to Octopus, the first thing you'll see when you jump into the dashboard, you'll get this. It's like an onboarding guide, and it tells you all the steps you need to do to deploy your first application. We're kind of going to follow that through today with some caveats to some runbooks at the end. Just before I move on and we start going through this guide, neat little helper. If you're ever stuck in Octopus, if you ever have an issue, if whatever screen you're on, go over to the little show help icon, click that. It'll give you some help depending on the screen that you're in Octopus. There are also some links to some resources like documentation or support pages. So The first thing we're going to do is tell Octopus about our infrastructure. So we need to create our first environment. So an environment in Octopus essentially is a logical grouping for deployment targets. So we all have deployment targets running in maybe some development servers, test servers, and production servers. We need to create environments for those deployment targets. So I'm going to go ahead and create my first environment. I'm going to stick to three basic ones that Octopus gives us examples for. So if you see down here, we've got development, test, and production. Nice and easy for me to click and not misspell anything. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. I'm going to go ahead, add another environment, test, and then the final environment is going to be production. I'll jump back in there. What you can see is we've got 3 empty environments. So now we need to start populating these environments with deployment. I'll go over to deployment targets. I'll add a new one. So a deployment target is where we're actually going to deploy our software. It's where the software is hosted and it's going to run. With Octopus, this could be Windows, Linux, Mac, Azure Cloud Services, Kubernetes clusters, offline package drop, and cloud regions. So today, we're actually going to be deploying to Linux machines. So we need to select the Linux deployment target. So there's a number of ways to get Octopus talking to your deployment target. First of all, you've got SSH connection. And also you have what's called a tentacle. So a tentacle will sit on, will be installed on your Linux machines where you're deploying your software to. And it can operate in 2 modes. We've got listening tentacle and polling tentacle. Difference between the two, listening will, when a job gets created or a task gets created in Octopus, it will push that straight to the listening tentacle. Whereas the polling tentacle will periodically poll for jobs from the deployment target up to the Octopus server. Now, why you choose one over the other, polling, you only have to open outbound traffic from the deployment target on the Octopus port. The listening tentacle, you will have to open inbound traffic on the deployment target. What I'm going to do is use listening tentacle today. And the first thing, it's going to give us some installation instructions. So we need to actually install the agent on the Linux machine. So I just open my SSH to my dev Linux box. So the first server we need to set up is our dev machine. Now, I've installed the Octopus Tentacle Manager already. However, I still need to configure the tentacle. I've done this for the test, production, and database machine, just to speed this along a little bit, but not the development box. So if I've created a script, so I have this script here, which is going to configure the tentacle on the Linux box. And we've got this variable here called thumbprint. It's the only variable that's missing. When you first came in to create a deployment target, it gives us this nice thumbprint. Now the thumbprint is used to ensure that there's a link between the deployment target and the Octopus server and creates a secure trust between the two. Oh, just try and copy that. Oh. Just do that again. There we go. So I was going to save that. And then I'm going to run that script. So just register the tentacle. Help if I could type. There we go. So it's just processing that bash script. Let's go to install a tentacle. That script I've just created, you can find lots of examples in our documentation on how to automate the installation of tentacles in your infrastructure. That's for Windows and Linux. So what I do is just minimize that. I jump in and it's going to ask for a host name. So these are running in AWS. I grab the capacity expired, mate. Just get that again. Give me a second. So my EC2 is back up. I get that again. Hopefully it doesn't expire. There we go. I'm going to grab and put the host name in there and hit next. And it's connected to the tentacle. So we now need to specify some options for this tentacle. So the first thing we need is the display name, so how it looks in the Octopus UI. We're deploying Pet Clinic, so I'm going to go Pet Clinic-web. And I'm also just going to say it's for the development environment. We need to actually choose an environment for this deployment target to run it. It's going to be development. And also tag it with a role. Our role is really important. When we go to create our deployment process pipeline, we're going to have a number of different steps, which deploys software to different parts of the infrastructure. Roles allow us to ensure we tag the steps to the right infrastructure. So I'm going to go Pet Clinic, and this is for our Tomcat box, our web box. No role exists. I'm going to add a new one. Hit save. So I need to add another one for my test environment. I'll go for the same process. I'm not going to run any kind of script because I've already done that. Go into test. Get my test DNS. And hit next. And same again. So it's going to be another web box. Pet Clinic web test. And hit test environment. Again, it's the same role. It's the web box. And I'm going to hit save. And then the last web box I need to set up in Octopus is the production one. I'll add another target. Same again. And again, display name, Pet Clinic, web, production. Again, choose an environment and a role and hit save. So the fourth target I need to add is our database runner or jump box, whichever terminology you want to use. So I've created the DBR box and get the public DNS. This is going to be responsible for running our database migrations. So rather than getting the web app machines to actually run database migrations and connect directly to the MySQL box, we'll do this on this database runner jump box machine instead. Again, get the public DNS, hit next. Again, I'm going to go with Pet Clinic. This time, it's going to be our database runner. And choose the environment. Now, what I'm going to do for the database runner, I'm actually going to choose all three environments. So whether I'm deploying to development, test, or production, I always want to use this machine. You probably wouldn't do that in a real-world setting. You probably have one for development, one for test maybe, and then a separate one for production, just to lock that down. Role is not the web. It's not a box for hosting the website, so I want to create a new role, and I call this DB runner, and hit save. Cool. So I've go back, go into environments. You can see we've got our environments now populated with deployment targets. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard. We've got a tick now where we have told Octopus to deploy our software and our infrastructure. The next, we need to actually get some packages into Octopus. This is going to be the software that we're actually going to deploy. So I'm going to go ahead and upload a package. There's a number of different ways for Octopus to pull packages and deploy them. So first of all, we have a built-in package repository, which you can push packages to and host with inside Octopus. So you get a couple of nice little starter guides here when this repository is empty. There's also some great docs on the Octopus website explaining in a bit more detail on how to create packages and how to push them. If I go into create packages, it gives some nice examples for ASP.NET, .NET Core, any other .NET technology, Node.js, and also Java. So it gives it tells us how to manually create the files. In terms of Java files we can have, we've got jar, war, ear, and ra. It can show you how to do it through command line and also the build server. So common practice will be for your build server to package your application and then push them directly into the Octopus built-in repository. Now, many of the popular CI servers have steps or Octopus integrations that use the Octopus CLI, where you can just add steps to build the package and then pack the package, and then push that to our repository. Go ahead and hit close. And also, some nice little helpers here on how to actually upload your packages, whether that's using a NuGet client, PowerShell, or Curl. But again, you can also do that using steps in a build server. So what we're going to do, I've already created the packages, so I want to upload them manually. I'm just going to create a new link to external feed, which I'll talk about in a second, because some of these packages do take a moment to upload. So let's select my package. So we've got two packages. We've got the MySQL Flyway zip package, which is responsible for our database migration, and also our Pet Clinic web application, our WAR file that we're going to deploy to Tomcat. So I'm going to upload the zip first. It is over 80 meg. I haven't got the greatest upload speed, so it does take a moment. But while that's uploading, I'm just going to jump into external feeds. So if you didn't want to use the inbuilt package repository from Octopus, or you already have an external feed, you can actually connect Octopus to these external feeds, grab your packages, and then deploy to your infrastructure. So in terms of feed types, you've got NuGet, Helm, AWS Elastic Container Registry, GitHub, Docker Container Registry, and finally a Maven feed. So you can connect you can get your packages from a Maven feed and then publish those out to Tomcat. I'll just jump back. It's still uploading. Just give that a second. There we go. And upload our web application package, which is half the size, so it shouldn't take as long. You can see the package file name. We've got the project name and also the version number and the file extension, which in this case is a WAR file. We also get the option to replace a version if it already exists. There we go. So that's now uploaded. Also, when you upload the package, you get the package ID, the version, when it was published, the title of the package, and the extension. I'm going to go back to the dashboard. So we've talked about our infrastructure, we've uploaded some packages. Now it's time to define our deployment process. So I'm going to go ahead and create the first project. So a project, again, it's a name to group our deployment pipeline. So we're going to be adding variables and steps to deploy our software in a second. We do that inside a project. And we go with application name. So Pet Clinic, hit save. And we can start going on and creating our deployment pipeline. Before we start adding steps, what I want to do first is just take you over to variables. So variables are a way of replacing configuration settings in your application configuration files. What I do, if I just take you over to the Pet Clinic source code. So if I look here in source main resources Spring, we've got a data source config XML. And if we scroll down, these are the properties to connect to our MySQL database. So we've got URL, username, and password. What you'll see is this syntax here: hashtag, open curly brace, a variable name, and closing curly brace. Octopus, I will create variables that match these names, and Octopus will place these at deployment time. So I'm going to go ahead and create the first one, which is project's database connection string. There we go. And I now need to add a value. I've got my connection string here with me. So if I just grab that, what I'll do, I'll just open the editor. You can see my connection string. What you'll also notice about this connection string, you'll see that syntax again, the hashtag, open curly brace, and closing curly brace. We need to populate these with some more variables, which Octopus again will replace at deployment time. So we need a project database DNS name and actual database name. Go ahead, hit done. Add that to the list. And I'm going to go ahead, create the first one, which is projects.database.dns. So I've got the database DNSs here. So I've got 3 MySQL servers running in AWS. This is the DNS for my development box, my development MySQL server. I'll add another value. That's the DNS for my test MySQL server. And finally, the DNS for my production. So we've got one project variable and 3 values. So we now need to tell Octopus what these values mean in our configuration file. So this one is I want this value to be present when I deploy to development. So we can do that by defining a scope. We can define a scope on many things in Octopus, such as channels, processes, target roles. We're using environments. So if I go on hit environment, choose development. When I go and deploy this application, Octopus sees its scope of development. It will use this value for that project variable. I'll define the second 2. This one's for test. And that's for production. Cool. Add that to the list. So the second one, project database name. Again, we have different database name for each environment. Dev, I'll take a copy of that. Add another value, which is going to be test. Again, I need to define the scopes. So this one's for development. Test. Also production. Add that to the list. If you remember, we also had the database username and password that we need to change. So I'm going to go project database username. His name is admin. Add to list. And next was password. Projects.database password. However, rather than using a plain text value for our password, let's change the type. You can have different types of values. We can use a 0 account, AWS account, which I'm going to cover off a bit later on. You can use a sensitive value. So I'm going to choose sensitive. So when I start typing this password, it should be hashed. And once I add that to the list, That gets saved into the Octopus database encrypted and will be decrypted during deployment time. So it's handy to keeping those passwords a secret. So we have all our variables for our database. That's right. So we are deploying to Tomcat using Tomcat Manager. And Tomcat Manager requires a username and password. I want to create some variables for those as well. So it's a little easy to set up the steps later on. Oh. Tomcat Manager. Check that. And also a Tomcat password. Again, I'm going to change that to sensitive. I'm going to go to the list. So I think that's all the variables I need. Let's double check. Yep, and save. Let's double check. That looks good to me. Cool. So we've now got our variables. I jump back into overview and we can start actually putting together our deployment pipeline. So I'll start off and define my deployment process. And we're going to add steps to actually deploy our application out. So we're going to need steps to deploy our database migrations and our application package to Tomcat. So Octopus comes with a whole host of steps that you can use. You can see here the different categories. The first thing I want to do is I want to halt the deployment before deploying to production. I want to get approval from a different team before I deploy to production. So what I want to do is just search for a manual intervention task. And I have one here called manual intervention required. I'm going to add that. What this is going to do is going to, like I say, it's going to halt the deployment before it deploys anything to production and get approval from a particular team. The first thing this step needs is a name. Get approval. It's going to run on the Octopus server. It wants me to give some instructions to the users this goes to. Please approve my deployment. And also choose a team it actually goes to approve this. I'm going to send this to the Octopus administrators. And as I mentioned, I only want this to run for the production environment. So if I look down here, we've got conditions. So I just drop that down. You can see we can say run only for a specific environment. I'm going to go ahead and click production. Hit save. Cool. So next, I want to deploy my database migrations package. And for that, we have some flyway steps contributed into our community steps. We can see here we've got flyway migrate and flyway migrate bash. These are part of our community steps. And this is done by a colleague of mine, Sean, which made things a little bit easier for me. I'm going to go ahead and install and add that to my project. Basically, I'm going to change this step name. It's going to say migrate. So now I'm going to go flyway migrate database. It's going to ask where I want to run this. What targets do I want to run this on? We've got two roles, what we set up earlier with the infrastructure. We've got PetConnect DB Runner and Web. I want this to run on our DB Runner machine. We've got a whole host of options now for this step. I only need to fill in a couple. So target URL, which is the connection string. And we actually set that up earlier in variables. So I can just go in here, click project database connection string, and it will use the values from our variable list that we created. Same with the user. So we can say project database username and also a password. So if I just project database password. And lastly, we need to reference the package. So I'm going to use the inbuilt Octopus server, and also select the Pet Clinic MySQL Flyway package. So when this step runs, it's going to grab that package and run the migrations for us. Double check that. Excellent. Let's save. And the third and final step is we actually deploy our application out to Tomcat. So come in here, search Tomcat, free installed templates. So I got start and stop application in Tomcat, deploy certificate to Tomcat, and deploy via manager. So we're going to be deploying via the manager. The first thing it wants again is a step name. Deploy Tomcat web. Again, it wants a target role. Pet Clinic web. And a package, again, Pet Clinic web. Then I got some Tomcat specific features here. So first of all, what's the Tomcat manager URL? That's localhost, and then that's fine for us. We're deploying the packages to the servers running the Tomcat manager. So when it deploys the package, it's going to look up on that machine and find localhost and find the Tomcat manager. Two things we do need to fill in here is the management user, which again, I created variables for. Project Tomcat username, and same again with the password. Cool. Next, the Tomcat deployment. So first of all, it wants a context path. We could leave this blank, and then we would go straight to the AWS DNS for that instance. It loads up the Pet Clinic site. I was going to give us a context of Pet Clinic. And also a deployment version. So with Tomcat, obviously you can run deployment versions in parallel. And I'm actually going to do that so I can show you some Octopus system variables. So Octopus comes, I've created all these variables here. Octopus actually comes with built-in system variables. So when I create a release of Octopus, it's going to generate a number, a release number. And I want that as my deployment version in Tomcat. Go to Octopus release.number. And there we go. And then lastly, we're going to come in here and click configure features. I'm going to take substitute variables in files. So I showed you the data source XML. And we need to actually instruct Octopus to look for this particular file and replace variables from our variable list inside that file. So the location of the file, webinf classes spring data source config .xml. And that's me done with this Tomcat step. Go ahead and click save. So we've got our deployment steps. What I'm going to do next now is actually create a release, which is going to tie all this together, take a snapshot of the variables and the deployment process, and create a release. So first of all, that's for a version number, and it's going to show us the packages. Can get Octopus to take these version numbers and auto-populate the version. I'm just going to change that just to 0.0.0, and I'm going to hit save. So we've now created a release. So like I just mentioned, we've taken a snapshot of the variables and the deployment process. So if we go ahead and change the deployment process, this release won't actually be affected. If you change the variables and you want this release to be affected, you can come down here and update variables. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and deploy to development. So you get the option of doing it now or later. I can exclude particular steps, and it also gives us some information on the particular steps that are going to run. Now we're only deploying to development, so it's not actually going to run the first step of getting approval. So we'll go ahead and hit deploy. That's going to kick off, what it's going to do now, we can see the task summary. You can see it's acquiring packages. What that means is getting the packages from the built-in Octopus server and pushing those to the deployment targets. It's ran the flyaway migrate database step. We can see a little bit more if we go into the task log. We can see down here, we can see the flyaway database migration package. We can see some of the variables that it's swapped. And give this a second to finish, and that's completed. We should see now, we deployed the flyaway migration database, and we deployed the Tomcat web application. We'll take a little bit more about the task log on the Tomcat web application in a second. Before we just move on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy to the test environment. And yep, kick off. Because we completed our first deployment process, see down here, you get this nice little badge. You can actually go on and complete a short feedback form. I'll actually send you a pack of stickers for doing so. Hit close. What I do is just jump into AWS a second. I'm going to get my DNS for just create a new link. And I'm going to go Pet Clinic, and we should see the Pet Clinic web application load. That's great. And we can see it's deployed to test. So all I do is kick off a deployment to production. And what we've got this time, we can see it's running the get approval task, and it hasn't moved on to acquire packages yet. So it's waiting for our approval. Now, I can assign to me. You probably wouldn't do that in a real world situation. Approving your own deployments is probably not the greatest idea. So I'm going to say, okay, to go. Give a nice little message and proceed. So that will now proceed and acquire the packages again and from the following steps. Again, I'll just jump into AWS. Check my Pet Clinic application is actually up and running. And jump back, and we can see the production deployment going through. It's migrated the database. And I did say I was going to circle back around to the Tomcat application. You can see the task log here. It's just deploying the WAR file that we uploaded. And what will happen next, it will deploy that to Tomcat and start the application. Let's give that a second. There we go. We can see application started successfully and deployed successfully. We can also just come into here, into log level, jump into verbose and get additional information about what actually took place on the server. I'll double check. That's okay. Excellent. And what I'll do as well, I'll just get the same URL. I'm just going to go to the Tomcat manager. Log in. You see the Tomcat manager web page. So you can see here, we've got the context of Pet Clinic. We can see the version, and that's the Octopus version that we used. Remember the system variable that we used in the Tomcat step. So that's all looking good. So we've deployed our application to development, test, and production. So what I'm going to move on to next. So we've done the software deployment side. Now, a new feature of Octopus is our Runbooks. So when you're looking after application, there's a lot of ops side to looking after the app. An example of that might be creating infrastructure. Or in our case, what we're going to do is make a database backup. So I'm going to back up an RDS MySQL database. using Runbooks. So what I've done earlier, I'm going to be using an AWS CLI script step to actually take the snapshot. So I need an AWS account for that. So if you look into infrastructure accounts, I've created this AWS account here that allows me access into our AWS instance. So I'm going to go to projects, back into Pet Clinic, and variables. So I need some additional variables for my Runbook. So the first variable I need is account, AWS account. And the value I'm going to use, I'm going to change the type, and I'm going to use AWS account. It's going to launch this search screen. It's going to show me the AWS account that I've already created. Add that to the list. The next, when I take a snapshot, I actually need an identifier for the database. Now I have 3 databases for my application. So again, what we do is create projects, database, identifier, and I enter a value. So my identifier for my database for dev is that Octopus Java 101 MySQL dev. Add another value, go into test, and then go into prod. And again, I need to scope these to particular environments. Go ahead into test, and then lastly, scope this to production. Add to list. And I need one more variable. So I know when I create this AWS script step, it's going to ask me for a region in AWS. So I'm going to create a variable here to do that, to get that value for me. The value is EU list 2. I'll add that to list. I'll double check that. Looking okay. Yeah, and save. So we can now go on and create our Runbook. So with a Runbook, we can run these without actually creating a release. So if somebody comes up and says, okay, we need a backup of the Pet Clinic database, we can come in here and run this for a particular environment and get that backup done without creating a release, and also put some extra approvals around this Runbook. Go into Runbook, backup, database. So got an overview. It'll tell us the runs. We're empty at the moment, so we haven't created any, and also the process. So I'm going to add just one step today, and I want to deploy a AWS CLI script. So first thing, name. The script is actually taking a snapshot. So I'm going to say AWS MySQL snapshot. It's going to run on the Octopus server. It's going to ask us for the AWS account. We create a variable for that. Project AWS account. And also the region. I could have typed that in plain text, but I'm sure Project AWS region ID will come in handy later on. And I get a couple of options with this script step. We can either run, I can either write the source code here, or we can use a script inside a package. I'm actually going to write the script out here. The first thing I need is a variable, a PowerShell variable, database, and I want that to be my identifier. So it's going to be project database identifier. So now I just need to write the script step. So AWS, RDS, create DB snapshot. This is going to take a couple of parameters. So the first one, DB instance identifier. And that's going to be the variable I just created at the top, database, and also a name for my new snapshot. So, tell you what, I'll just make this a little bit bigger. I can see that on database. Where was I? DB snapshot identifier. Well, I'm just going to give this. It's just a random name. Just double check that, make sure I've typed that out correctly. I haven't forgot anything. Create DB. Oh, DB identifier. Cool. There we go. Minimize that and save. So I can go and publish this Runbook now. Or I can run. So I'll just take you through that in a second. So if I just go and hit run, I could choose an environment that I run this on. So I'm going to back up. I want a backup of the production database. Click run. It's going to run my AWS MySQL snapshot step. Give that a second. Task log, and we can see it's now got a tick. And we can see it's created that snapshot for me. So with this Runbook, you can publish that. And if you then make any changes to this process, so I go back, actually click publish, get snapshot. If anything, if I then go and change that Runbook, it won't affect this snapshot of this Runbook. And then what we could do is in the deployment process, we could go ahead and actually deploy a Runbook from the deployment process. So maybe before we do the database migrations, we actually kick off a database backup. And that's me done, Mark. Hopefully we have some questions, and I'll hand over to yourself.
Thank you for that, Adam. That was a really great run through of deploying a Java application for the first time. And yes, we do have quite a few questions actually coming in just in the last 5 or 10 minutes. So the first one is, there's actually 2 questions. One is, can you make this video available for watching later on? We'll certainly be doing that. It's going to be recorded for you, and we'll send that out in 24 to 48 hours. The second one is, does Octopus integrate with WebLogic Server?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not actually sure. Just give me a second. I'm not actually sure on that. What I'll do, I will get back to him on that after this call in Slack, and just try and get an answer to that for you.
No worries. Thanks for that. So the second one is, does the tentacle need to be run under an admin account to deploy packages?
It's recommended to run it as administrator. You could potentially not do it, but what the tentacle is doing a lot of local admin stuff, and it's running scripts. So you'd want to be running that as with administrative privileges. But good question.
Thank you. Good answer. So we've got another one here, which is come up quite a lot, I think, actually, is what would the rollback process look like in Octopus?
So that is a great question. So if I go to overview, so in Octopus, it's fairly easy to actually go and do a rollback of an application. Let's say I've got version 2 here. I can come back and deploy version 1 to production just by coming here, clicking it, and doing a redeploy. So I can just go ahead and hit redeploy. However, we are migrating databases in this project. Now, once a database has been migrated, it is fairly difficult to undo those changes. So it's all on how well you're set up for backwards compatibility with your database and your application. My recommendation is kind of roll forward, especially when using a tool like Octopus that allows you to push releases out quicker. Always roll forward. I always found it really tricky to roll back and get the database back in line with the application. But it's a great question.
Yeah, it comes up quite a lot as well. And there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, with rollbacks.
No.
So we've got another question. Does Octopus also support JBoss as well?
What we can do, if I just jump into process, I'll have to, well, I'll do it's another one. I'll have to double check after this call. So after this webinar, sorry. So rather than me just take a guess, I will just note that question down. The user will get back to him on that one.
Yeah, no worries. I know that we do support Wildfly, which I think is the successor to JBoss, I think.
Yes.
So yeah. Cool. And one more question we've got, which is it possible to package everything as a container and distribute it via a Docker container registry?
Yes, certainly is. So again, if I just go to library and jump into external feed, so you could push those to the feed, or you could grab these from an external feed, such as a Docker container registry. If I go back into the project, there's pet clinic, process, step. If I just typed in Docker, let's say, what we can do is we can run Docker containers and create and push an image. And if you're using some kind of orchestrator like Kubernetes, we've got Kubernetes steps as well. So certainly possible, yes.
Excellent. I think that is it for the questions. Let me just have a quick look in the Q&A. Yep, no, I think that's everything. Cool. So we're good on the questions for now. Thanks for that, Adam. Brilliant.
Cool, no problem, Mark.
Cool. So as we mentioned at the start, we're recording this webinar and we'll send this out in the next 24 to 48 hours. And that'll include some links to resources that Adam's used in today's session. Adam, thanks again for that run through. It was great. And thank you to everybody who joined us. One final thing from me, we've got details of all of our upcoming events on octopus.com/events. And that includes some of our webinars. So the next one we've got is the latest database DevOps techniques in AWS with Redgate. That's on the 3rd of June. And then on the 17th of June, we have a webinar on the topic of cloud hybrid and Octopus. So lots of great topics coming up, and hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.